Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
Welcome.
Wait, what are you doing here? Dude, this is the wrong day. What's going on?
This is a bonus episode.
Oh. Hi.
Welcome to Monday. This is actually, I'm thinking this is Mechanical Monday because we're going to talk today about a mechanical creature, a mechanical man. Or
this is actually a very important part of one of the more powerful cycles in this set.
Yeah, so we intimated, in last week's Thursday episode that we are going to enter an interesting world of Battle Cruiser Standard, I think, where it's awesome Planeswalkers against Titans. And we have a heck of a Titan cycle. And the odd thing to me, and maybe you have a disagreement around this, is last time the Green Titan was the best, but this time, even though they costed it a little bit less, the Green Titan's not as primeval, let's say. However, we're revealing the red one today, and it's a doozy.
I agree with everything you said, except I'm not 100% sold on the green one not being as primeval, so to speak. But we'll get to that in a bit. Let's unveil this Combustible Gearhulk.
So, Combustible Gearhulk is a 6-mana creature. It is 4 red for an artifact creature construct. So, this is a little bit of an unusual card, depending on how long you've been playing. It's an artifact, but you cast it with colored mana, right? And for 4 red, you get a 6/6 creature with first strike. So 6/6 for 6. That's with first strike. But wait, there's more. There's a huge paragraph on this, and it says when Combustible Gearhulk enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If the player doesn't, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then Combustible Gearhulk deals damage to that player equal to the total converted mana cost of those cards. So it starts off as a browbeat, but instead of drawing the cards, you put them into your graveyard. But some insane thing can happen. So if you flip over 3 other Combustible Gearhulks, they might just be dead. Or you can flip over substantially less than 18, and they might just be dead because you're in red. This is a really powerful card, I think.
So the entire Gearhulk cycle are a bunch of just super sick, mythic rare creatures that I'm not even sure Titan is the right example. Like, obviously, they were set up to try to evoke some of the imagery of Titans, but they're incredibly powerful, like Necrotals, 2-for-1s. But the 2-for-1 is actually a little bit of a trick because the ability is much stronger than an extra card. Much, much stronger than an extra card. For instance, here, your opponent is going to give you 3 cards, or they're going to take an enormous, like a potentially large amount of damage. How much damage is really a function of how your deck building works. But what's great is that in addition to having this powerful effect, a 6/6 first strike creature is that is nothing to shake a stick at.
I mean, once the body is in play, who's going to rumble with it?
Right, and so the question of how powerful this card is would seem to come down to how much damage are you doing on the average with Combustible Gearhulk when your opponent, if your opponent were to make you do the damage version. Because if this was just a 6/6 first strike when it comes into play, draw 3 cards, that would be nutty.
Yeah, it would be like Bedlam Reveler is already seeing play in other formats, right? Bedlam Reveler is making top 8s in high-quality events in Standard already. And Bedlam Reveler is not a 6/6 first strike.
So, like, a 6-mana draw 4 would not be good enough because there's other options. But a 6-mana draw 5 would be like, there's tons of stuff there. That's powerful. This is a If you were to just count the draw card version, this is like a draw 4, but one of the cards is a 0 mana 6/6 first strike. Or a different way to put it is that this is a draw 5. One of the cards is a 3 mana 6/6 first strike, which is a pretty absurd card. That's just bananas, right? Like, that's just way too good. And then the other card is Black Lotus.
I love, you started using that, and I don't know if you used it in common language for very long, but you started using it on the podcast maybe like 2 or 3 weeks. I love it so much. I think of everything that way now. Like, oh, well, I used to think about Collected Company in relation to Inspiration. And I'm like, why is Collected Company so much better than Inspiration when it can miss and Inspiration can't? When it's restrictive and Inspiration isn't restrictive. Sometimes Inspiration gets you lands. Well, Collected Company draws your draw cards, and 2 of the cards are Black Lotus.
Right. Right, that's how I knew. That's like, if you look at my summoning, like the Collected Company, like the first week when Collected Company was first unveiled, the predictions for it, and then earlier, Blood, all the way back. This is the moment that Bloodbraid Elf was previewed, predicted absurd things for it because it's insane. It's just it's a Mold Drifter for a mana cheaper that's a 3/2 haste, and one of the 2 cards that draws you a selection, and the other card is Black Lotus. Once you start looking at the cards that are saving mana or cheating mana in some way, it makes it so much easier. It's like a cheat code for being able to evaluate the new cards in a way that makes it easier to predict the stuff like Bloodbraid Elf Collected Company or any of the other cards that are secretly hiding extra cards, or they're giving you cards and mana at the same time. And in general, it's better to take your advantage and spread it out across multiple types, just instead of just all extra cards or all mana. If you're able to get the effect in gaining an advantage in a couple fronts, that can be very, very strong because there's diminishing returns to extra cards in your hand. But in any event, the Combustible Gearhulk, it's not really if you could get to a space where your deck was set up in a way where people were just always going to give you the 3 cards, then you have done some really, really good stuff. The question is how much work. That is incredible because really a 3 mana 6/6 first strike is way too good, and the other card is Black Lotus. So like, if instead you were, in many ways, it's functionally a draw 6, because I think a 6/6 first strike is very comparable to 3 extra cards. So I think that it's the real question becomes, how much does your opponent actually have to give you those cards? If they give you, if they do the damage, how much damage are you going to deal on the average?
So here's I'm just going to lay out like a really extreme situation.
Real question.
So what if the fear is always that the top 3 cards are 3 more Combustible Gearhulks, right? If that's the case, you always get to draw 3 cards, right? Because no one's going to let you do 18 to them, right? If they get the option. However, if that's actually the fear, drawing 3 more Combustible Gearhulks each time is awesome, because the same situation will occur in a different level of magnitude for each of the successive Combustible Gearhulks that you're drawing, right? So I think that's really interesting. I think that, I don't know.
That's some wishful thinking, though.
Yeah, I'm just saying that
you're just planning on your draw 3 being.
That's the extreme.
I promise you, I can come up with more extreme.
I'm just saying the extreme of what people. Oh, okay, that's right. There you win. What if it's Emrakul, Kozilek, and Ulrich?
Right, like if you just put this card in a red-green ramp deck, and maybe you don't want to play Chandra as much anymore, Chandra 6, because you have Chandra 4. And you were going to use Chandra 4 to +2 mana to play your Combustible Gearhulk on turn 5. And what's more, your Combustible Gearhulk is also helping make up for the lack of Dragonlord Atarka, but in terms of having extra big threats that are worth playing. But the thing is, if you can actually put an Eldrazi on top of your deck, your opponent has to give it to you. They have to give you the cards, or they're just going to die so often. So, like for instance, if you're able to put an Eldrazi back on top of your deck, whether be it from searching your deck, because you could play Combustible Gearhulk immediately after. I mean, it takes a ton of mana to use the Eldrazi, the conduit of ruin, but you could, in theory, you could put an Eldrazi back on top of your deck with something like Mortuary Mire. But it doesn't even have to be an Eldrazi. You could literally put a Combustible Gearhulk on top of your deck with Mortuary Mire. Now, if your opponent gives it to you, you'll just Combustible Gearhulk again. So they basically can't give it to you, but they are going to take 6 damage plus however much damage the other cards are. So the Combustible Gearhulk will very reliably be dealing 10 or more and actually get to do it.
I think that this is mind-boggling, this card. Because the prospect that you would give somebody for 6 mana a 6/6 first strike, which is nothing to shake a stick at, right? Once it's already in play. And you actually just willfully give them 3 cards a lot of the time, that's going to be what people do. The fear of death is too substantial.
This is definitely putting them between a rock and a hard place, you know? I think there's some interesting other synergies to consider, like with Soaring Grim Nemesis. The fact that Soaring Grim Nemesis cares about some of the same stuff that Combustible Gearhulk does regarding the top of your deck. So if you have some cards that synergize with Combustible Gearhulk, they'll synergize with Soaring Grim Nemesis, and vice versa. Another part of the equation, Combustible Gearhulk is an artifact. If there are cards that will make your artifacts cheaper, you can power out, gain some acceleration there. If you have any amount of ability to search your deck for artifacts, for instance, like if you were to ultimate Saheeli Rai, you could search your deck for three different Gearhulks and really mess some stuff up. Just start smashing stuff.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And then so I don't think that there's one in Standard right now, but historically they've frequently made different versions of stuff where you can pay, like, for instance, maybe 3 mana to put as many creatures from your graveyard on top of your deck in any order as you want and draw a card. If you do something like that and then Combustible Gear, if you were to put Combustible Gearhulk and then 4 other creatures back on top of your deck, you immediately draw a creature, untap, draw Combustible Gearhulk, play it, and now your top 3 cards are 20 damage. Or your opponent just gives them all to you. Or, if you have something like Congregate with Dawn, if they end up making a Congregate of Dawn card at some point, or if this gets played in Modern, I don't know. But if you Congregate with Dawn, Combustible Gearhulk, and then the next 2 cards down are at least 20 costs together, even if it's a fake 20. Because if you were to Congregate with Dawn and go get, like, for instance, Gurmag Anglers, that right there, I mean, you could just have Gurmag Anglers in your deck, and they're quite good. And if you do this interaction, you're guaranteed at least 14 damage with your Combustible Gearhulk. And you only need to put 1 Gearhulk in your deck. And there's other stuff you could do. You could do even bigger. I mean, you could potentially have in your deck an Emrakul, because you're like, well, sometimes Emrakul's a lot cheaper, and I have a Gurmag Angler. So if you give me my top 3 cards, you're going to take 20. So you won't give me my top 3 cards in damage. You'll give them to me in my hand, and then I just have a Gurmag Angler, an Emrakul, and a random card. And I don't know. That might be too fancy, but the point being that I think there are enough ways that you can manipulate Combustible Gearhulk that you could potentially turn this into, you could set up some scenarios where you're just really putting your opponent between a rock and a hard place. At the end of the day, though, we're still talking about a browbeat variant that is a 6-cost artifact creature that, while it costs 6, doesn't have as big of an impact on the board as you would like. It isn't the best when you're behind. It requires, even when you draw the extra cards, they're usually expensive, and it is it's also living in a world of things like Emrakul, and despite all those things, this thing is giving you so much body, so much power, so much extra cards. It definitely seems like this is one that if you're willing to do a little bit of work, if you don't do any work, it's decent, and if you do a little bit of work, it starts becoming great fast.
Yeah, it can be a Draco explosion. That's, I think, that's the sizzle, right? But then the steak is actually pretty good too, and that sometimes they're like, all right, I'll let you do damage to me, and you flip over 3 lands. It's not the worst thing in the world to have a 6/6 for 6, right? But that's not what you were going for. But I think there's going to be plenty of games where you don't have to do 20. Maybe if you're doing 6, you do 10, or you still got a big body there, and I think doing 10 is probably a reasonable amount of damage to do. Obviously it depends on the composition of your deck. Decks like this can't only be expensive casting costs; they have to be also cheap cards that ramp you to those expensive casting costs, or lands to cast those expensive cards. So, like you said, it's not always going to be hellfire and roses, but I think that it's going to be awesome a lot of the time, and that's going to give games like a strong level of excitement that also has some choice on the other side, right? I think you don't necessarily want to have games that just seem totally defined by luck, but you do want top decks and top of the library to be exciting. Does that make sense? And I think that this card is very successful at accomplishing that.
It's interesting how these Gearhulks interact with all of the colorless creature rewards. We have historically used some of those colorless creature rewards for the purposes of powering up Eldrazi, but it might be worth revisiting some of them and seeing what synergies might end up being applicable for the Gearhulks.
Well, the Gearhulks are colored, though, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, you're right. So they don't have Devoid. You're right. Because they are artifacts, but they are colored. You're absolutely right. So instead, it's actually what are the things that work with artifacts? They work with some sort of a tinker thing type of effect. And we had Thopter Spy Network in Magic Origins. It's gone, but what other stuff in this new set is there? Obviously Saheeli Ra is one, but...
Combustible Gearhulk is red. And you know who else is red? PNLR. PNLR has a pumping ability that thrives on having a bunch of red mana in play. And I think that's something that maybe you would be able to expect if you had this card in your deck. All right, she can make it so that this Gearhulk, which is a huge body, can get through by helping make it so that blockers can get through. I'm sorry, attackers can get through blockers.
I'm definitely, but I'm also just picturing stuff like if there's some sort of a thirst for knowledge type of deal, something where it's do a thing you want to do, and it's better if you have an artifact. The fact that you can use the Gearhulks as the artifact that you are, when push comes to shove in some sort of a pinch type of situation. So I think it's going to be really interesting because I would guess that there's going to be a spot in the not too distant future where they do that, where they print a bunch of rewards and suddenly the Gearhulks get a bit better. Even stronger still from where they're at.
But I think that most, if not all 5, are probably going to be playable right out the gate, right? They seem like strong, large creatures to me.
Oh yeah, in general they seem pretty strong. I think that Combustible Gearhulk, I think is it's going to be tricky making it work just because of in a ramp deck, just because there's so many good options. But it has a really potentially high ceiling, and in other strategies, I think that the world we're about to go to is so different that it's not totally clear what the like how much damage on the average is Combustible Gearhulk doing, and how much can people be going up that high in mana. I think that there's because of stuff like Chandra Torch of the the new Chandra 4 Torch, Chandra Torch of Defiance. Yeah, she gives you extra red mana in such an abundance in places that it makes it just a lot easier, a lot more palatable to play more expensive cards than you normally would, which works great for the red Gearhulk being able to average more damage. One of the equations that I think people are going to do is figure out what the average damage that if you did no work at all, what is the average amount of damage that the Gearhulk is doing? And Combustible Gearhulk in, like, for instance, an Eldrazi, like a red-green Eldrazi deck, is frequently going to be averaging like 5 damage.
I just realized something. If you're playing a Delirium-type deck or an Emrakul-type deck, even if you're not getting a huge amount of damage through, just binning 3 cards while getting a 6/6, that's not 0, right? That's not like you did nothing, right? You did something that helps 100%. Your strategy.
Exactly. 100% agree. And what's more, it's an artifact. So that your Emrakul can actually, like, because, like, you know how, like, right now people will sometimes play a Hedron Crawler or Hedron Archive, and they just lost Hangerback Walker, and Hedron Archive is still good, but if you were to Gearhulk, you now have extra artifacts. So even just a couple Gearhulks in your deck add the amount of artifacts so that you're more likely to be able to actually Emrakul earlier. Plus, when you do stuff like Collective Defiance early, if you Collective Defiance on turn 5, you can discard Combustible Gearhulk and other stuff and just be getting extra types. You know, the fact that you are ripping through your deck more, it's nice having different enchantments, artifacts, creatures to discard, planeswalkers, and having something like Combustible Gearhulk that accomplishes those goals incidentally. You know, because, like, when you're, like, take for instance if you're playing a red-black mid-range deck. If you mill with Combustible Gearhulk, your Liliana the Last Hope has more options as to what to get back. And if you mill with Liliana the Last Hope, you might find a Combustible Gearhulk and be able to bring it back.
Well, for that matter, your Combustible Gearhulk can also help fuel your Goblin Dark Dwellers, right?
Yep.
Or your, you guess you don't have Kolaghan's Command anymore. But these cards that are all helping to scavenge value out of the graveyard, you know, even when he's not at the max, he's doing something. And, you know, sometimes he is utterly spectacular.
Yep. Also, one other big important thing that is vital to remember with Combustible Gearhulk, and all of the Gearhulks for that matter, when Saheeli Rai comes down, generally, frequently, often, one of the best plays she can make is the ability to use her -2. And if you drop Saheeli Rai and -2 and copy a Gearhulk, you are doing it. Because Saheeli Rai, if you drop the Gearhulk to begin with, you're already likely, just in the dark, going to be doing a bunch of damage. Say you do 4 or 5 damage to your opponent. And if your 6/6 first strike lives, frequently it's not a game-winning advantage. It's a great piece on the table. But if you drop Saheeli Rai or whatever, if you drop Saheeli, you can copy the Gearhulk, dome again, and attack for an extra 6. So that on your attack, you have 12 power of creatures attacking that turn. And also you have a bunch of damage to the face from the top 6 cards of your deck. I think that's just such a exciting ability. And there's other stuff in the set that copies that kind of stuff too. You know, like Saheeli's Artistry. The fact that Saheeli's Artistry can copy an artifact, or it can copy a creature, or it can copy both. So Saheeli's Artistry actually could copy 2 Gearhulks, or it could copy a Gearhulk and a different creature. So there's some different ways to abuse the fact that it's an artifact, specifically in this set.
I was a little lukewarm on Saheeli as a main deck card, but I think that you make a good point, which is that you can just play Saheeli. I mean, obviously she's awesome on turn 3, right? And that 3-mana Planeswalkers are awesome because they cost 3 mana. But you can play her as a late game card too. Like, you can play her post Gearhulk, and she does an awesome thing. That's way more than drawing a single card if you play her after Combustible Gearhulk or any Gearhulk or anything like that. Like, and I don't know, you're probably in a situation where you can go like 6 mana Combustible Gearhulk, turn 7 or later, Saheeli with some sort of interaction mana open. And I think that it's interesting. She has a very interesting wrinkle there, and it's especially true considering the fact that you're always going to want to play her in a deck that can get powerful artifacts as part of her limit break.
But in fact, it's actually, there's even more so. Every single one of her abilities is fantastic with the Gearhulks. I think that's by design. Because, like, the +1 with the Scry, for instance, when you Scry +1 and do damage to your opponent, you're contributing to the damage plan that the red Gearhulk is going for. But also Scry 1. If it's a land, put it on the bottom, but if it's an expensive card, now you pull the trigger on dropping the Gearhulk. And there's a little bit of gamesmanship, right?
Yeah.
Where you just scried, and then you drop. This is the spot where you pick to drop your Gearhulk. Is your opponent going to give it to you? That's particularly important in this world where it's just very possible to just play a lot of Emrakul's in your deck. So I think that it is very likely that we will see some sort of a blue-red, a continuation of the blue-red strategies that involve, going into Emrakul in some way, that you can use some amount of this combustible Gearhulk as an added weapon, and with Saheeli to potentially scry, help set it all up. The fact that you're going to want some Planeswalkers anyway, and then also the fact that Oath of Chandra and Oath of Jace work so well with Saheeli and Chandra 4. Chandra Torch of Defiance.
I just had an amazing picture in my head.
If you have Oath of Jace and you discard all this stuff, you're playing into the Emrakul plan anyway. Anyway, what were you saying?
It's actually going to be possible in the new world that you have like the top 4 of a premier event, and it's blue-red Flash Spirits, blue-red Eldrazi Ramp, blue-red Saheeli Gearhulk, and blue-red Thermo Alchemist as like the top 4 decks. I mean, like, insane, right? But blue-red is going to be so rich, and blue-red even gets a new land. That's the other thing. This set's got a new land for blue-red, and it's a good one.
So I think that it's important to not gloss over the Oath of Jace too much, though. Oath of Jace lets you do a lot of scrying, because there's all these Planeswalkers with Chandra, Torch of Defiance, and Saheeli. If you get to scry that much, you can rip through your deck and set up a pretty awesome a combustible Gearhulk worthy. Like, you can, it might not be that difficult to get yourself into a spot where you can actually just reliably get 3 extra cards from the Gearhulk, because your opponent just can't afford to risk it. And then when you get the 3 extra cards, you're just going to Emrakul them anyway.
Yeah, you're going to either get the Emrakul or the material to cast the Emrakul, or I don't know, the counterspell to protect the Emrakul. I think this card is going to be cool. I think that it's probably not going to be as universally lauded, adopted, and played as Chandra, Torch of Defiance, but I think it's going to be a strong role player in Standard and maybe cross format.
I think it's going to be. I think that's a pretty reasonable assessment. I think it's going to be a role player, and because of the fact that it's an artifact and there's some like weird Draco Explosion type interactions and certain powered formats have ways to set the top of your deck up a little bit more, it's possible that it's a part of some like crazy combos in more powered formats. It's a little bit of a long shot, but it definitely has very real chances there. Whereas in Standard, I think it's going to be a role player that definitely it's also a little fun just trolling people, putting them in that decision of having to choose. Yep.
Do you want to quickly run through the other Gearhulks?
Sure.
All right. So I made a comment earlier that the Verdurous Gearhulk is not particularly primeval. This Gearhulk is 3 GG for a 4/4. It has trample. So all the Gearhulks have it's like a regular combat ability, right? So like trample or menace or first strike. This one has trample and has the additional ability: when Verdurous Gearhulk enters the battlefield, distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. So, like, worst case scenario, this guy's an 8/8 for 5, which is pretty good. Sometimes it's, like, really interesting, though.
Yeah. Dude, you of all people, I would think, I mean, this card seems fantastic. This card's, like, just absolutely amazing, right? Like, it's like, to begin with, you've played Spectral Force. You know how good a 5-mana 8/8 trample is. And that one had a drawback.
It did. In fact, it had a huge drawback.
So now, do you remember Wolfear Silverheart?
I do. Wolfear Silverheart was the man.
This is so much better than Wolfear Silverheart. This is a 4/4 trample that gives +4/+4 like it's haste. And even though the Wolfear Silverheart itself could be an 8/8 if everything was just living, when the Wolfear Silverheart would die, you would have nothing. When Verdurous Gearhulk dies, you still have the +4/+4. So it's actually just a much smoother hedge. Instead of being 12/12 or nothing when it dies, this one is an 8/8, and you still have 4/4 when it dies. But in addition, and this is an important part, you can split the counters up. That's so wild. The tactical implications. Like, you can just make all your cards have numbers that line up better for this board state. Or you can just dump counters on a creature that has, like, lifelink or double strike or hexproof. Or you can distribute the counters to 4 different creatures so that when you have a card that draws a card for every +1/+1 counter, you draw cards. Or you can put +1/+1 counters on creatures with evasion when you need to kill a planeswalker. This is like a 4/4 haste, but it also gives you a 4/4 afterwards. Like, this is a Broodmate Dragon, and half of it has haste.
Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. And the other half has trample.
Right. Like, you get a 4/4 haste and a 4/4 trample. And the 4/4 haste is split up. It does require bodies, but it's split up across however many bodies. So it's not like you're invested the same way as an aura would be. And you can still just stack them if you're willing to give up the haste. Like, this is like a heck of a card, right? This is the only reason that this Gearhulk isn't just like a clear, absolute slam dunk home run, dominate whatever, is that Nissa Vital Force and Ishkana Graph Widow are both absolutely absurd green 5-drops. So there is some just ultra fierce competition for the green cards that dodge Spellqueller.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you want defense, it's hard to do better than Ishkana Graph Widow.
Oh, yeah.
And that this guy's got better offense than Ishkana, but I'm not sure that its offense is better than Nissa. That's the thing. And this just seems like a real flexible, powerful card to me. But I do think this card's going to see play. I think that it's going to have homes. It's good like in a rampy situation. I think it's good like. I mean, I'm going to say infect, but obviously there's no infect creatures in standard. But there's just like a guy that you're going to have that has like some awesome ability, and if he gets through, you're going to really punish your opponent. This is going to be friends with that guy, whoever that guy is. I'm imagining him being a blighted agent right now, but it's not a blighted agent.
I mean, there's going to be incidentally just various things you can do with either +1/+1 counters or keying off of stats. You know, like for instance. There's a green creature in this set that has Fabricate 2. It's Cultivator of Blades. 3 green for a 1/1. Fabricate 2. So you can either get 2/1/1 colorless artifact creatures, or you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on this guy. So when Cultivator of Blades attacks, you can have other attacking creatures get +X into end of turn, where X is the Cultivator of Blades power. So if you have Cultivator of Blades and you put 4+1/+1 counters on it from your Gearhulk on the next turn, your green Gearhulk, it's now effectively your Cultivator of Blades is now going to give +7/+7 to your team. Or if you just made 1/1s with the Cultivator of Blades, you're just going to be giving +5/+5 to your team, and it'll probably be like 50 damage, 30 damage. And I don't know that Cultivator of Blades is one you actually want to be playing. But
you had me imagining this as an amazing overrun, actually.
Yeah, because Cultivator of Blades is already 3 bodies, right? Like it's a 1/1, a 1/1, and a 1/1, but the 1/1 in the the good 1/1, when it attacks, is overrunning the rest of your team a little bit, and so it's very, very good to use with ways to pump stats. And so if your deck has things, whether if you can play Gideon, Ally of Zendikar works fantastic with both of these cards. If you have any amount of anthems or just basically ways to pump your guys. So I just think that the fact that the Gearhulk can put the counters where you want them, and it is likely to come up surprisingly potently, because I bet that Cultivator of Blades is not as good as it gets. It might be, and it might be good enough. But I'm going to be keeping my eye open for creatures that key off of how much power, like how much damage they do to the opponent, or how much power they have, or how many +1/+1 counters they have, or whatever. Because I think we're going to see some amount of that stuff in the set.
So the green Gearhulk has the superpower of being 5 mana, and so does Cataclysmic Gearhulk, which is the white one, which is a 3WW for a Vigilant Gearhulk. And this card is bonkers to me. It's a 4/5 for 5, but when you cast it, when Cataclysmic Gearhulk enters the battlefield, each player chooses from among the non-land permanents he or she controls an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker, then sacrifices the rest. It's like a Tragic Arrogance or a Cataclysm on a 4/5 for the same mana.
Well, so it's important to note the difference between Cataclysm and Tragic Arrogance.
Oh, yeah. One of them doesn't destroy lands. Sure.
Yeah, but also Tragic Arrogance, the person casting the Tragic Arrogance got to choose.
Oh, yes, that is also very powerful.
That's a really big deal. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
So with Cataclysmic Gearhulk, you're letting your opponent choose. Like, basically, it's not so much letting, because it's not like Tragic Arrogance is even legal anymore anyway. But when you cast Cataclysmic Gearhulk, you destroy all of your opponent's creatures except one. Because you can just put it in a deck that doesn't have a ton of creatures, but it doesn't have to be your only creature. You can actually cast Cataclysmic Gearhulk when you have another creature in play, and it doesn't cost you, because Cataclysmic Gearhulk can just be your artifact.
Yep.
And you are the one who can set it up, so you can just arrange to have stuff, a good mix of stuff. Whereas if your opponent is too long on Stasis Snare types, or if your opponent managed to get ahead of you on Planeswalkers, but more likely you just are going to sweep their board. They're going to lose all their creatures but one.
This is great against Swarmers.
Right, exactly. It's going to be so incredibly potent against swarm strategies. And then it can't be spell quellered, but it also can't be negated. Negate is classically how a lot of different strategies stop people from sweeping after sideboarding, is they'll use a negate. And if you have, imagine you're playing against a Spirits deck, and they've got negate, they've got spell queller, they've got rattle chains, and not a one of those things is going to interact with Cataclysmic Gearhulk correctly.
Yeah, Cataclysmic Gearhulk is going to be a monster in that situation. Even if he only kills one or two of their small spirits, he's probably bigger than their squad, right? And he's vigilant. He's good at defense. I think this guy's awesome.
And here's a very subtly important one. He's a 4/5. It's a 4/5, which means it lives through Chandra. When Chandra if you just play a Cataclysmic Gearhulk, Chandra can't just kill it outright. You know, that's a big deal because it's going to incidentally just end up in spots where it matches up right. It's the right card for the job. You know.
Yeah, agree. Absolutely. I think that's I'm not sure which is going to be the best. I think the blue one might be the best, but the Cataclysmic Gearhulk is very exciting to me because I think that just really so much of the force of a Tragic Arrogance with a 4/5 body attached, or so much of a Cataclysm with for just one more mana is, and also Vigilance is. I think it could be a big deal. I think there can be a lot of decks that are really, really far behind against this card, and like you leave them with one creature, and like you said, you could potentially have two creatures because you picked this one as an artifact, but you leave them with one creature. What are even the chances that creature is bigger than a 4/5? Right? You're just winning on multiple vectors with one move here.
Now, Cataclysmic Gearhulk has its work cut out for it. It's the same cost as Archangel Avacyn.
And Thalia's Lancers.
Yeah, so this is going to be... I like this card a fair bit more than Thalia's Lancers, personally. But we'll see. I think Thalia's Lancers is also a good card.
Yeah, I mean, but they're very, very different cards, right? Like Thalia's Lancers is like... That's like the strings that hold up a puppet, right? Like, this guy is like a sledgehammer that used to knock down the puppet theater.
One of the reasons I'm so excited about Cataclysmic Gearhulk is that it's such a Mondo combo with Eldrazi Displacer.
Oh. That guy just gets better and better every time I look at him. He just taps down Emeralds. He just undoes all these awesome things that people are trying to do.
But then the fact that you can blink your Cataclysmic Gearhulk, or any of the other Gearhulks for that matter, but you can blink your Cataclysmic Gearhulk, and you get to keep the Eldrazi Displacer since it's your creature and the Gearhulk is the artifact, and then you can just lock your opponent out where they can never have more than one creature.
Yep.
And heck, if you have 6 mana, you can always just blink the one creature they do have. In order to tap and return. Like, that's already just a soft lock by itself. I think that demands a deck. That's just so powerful of interaction that that requires there to be a deck to do that. That's just so powerful. It's so good, and they're both amazing on their own. This isn't like one of those Mondo combos where the individual parts are weak. The Mondo combo is like the two cards together will win most games from most positions. And then also, if you draw one on its own, it's just merely a fantastic card.
The other thing that I like about playing Cataclysmic Gearhulk, whether in combination with Eldrazi Displacer or not, is that it encourages you to play multiple card types, including enchantment. And I think that both the card Eldrazi Displacer and the card Stasis Snare, which is an enchantment, obviously, are so interestingly well positioned, I think, in the new world. Like, they can... like an Emrakul has protection from instants, but it doesn't have protection from Stasis Snare. And, people... What?
Good point.
Yeah, so people put so much work into getting that Emrakul. Just like, you can answer it, or you can tap it down, right? Like,
I do think you got to be careful, though, because you can't play too many Stasis Snares if you're going to play a Cataclysmic Gearhulk. Just because you'll lose all the Stasis Snares but one.
That's correct. You have to be... Yeah, you just have to be careful about, knowing how your own cards work. You're right, though, of course. But I think, like, that's a thing where as long as you're not overly aggressive with how you're playing your cards, that's probably something that you can manage too. What about Noxious Gearhulk? How do you feel about this guy? He's a 4 BB, so 6. He's more expensive than the last two Gearhulks. For a 5/4 menace, when Noxious Gearhulk enters the battlefield, you may destroy another target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. This is a powerful Gearhulk, I think.
It's definitely something that's very desirable to be able to do. It'll be interesting to see if the format ends up lining up in a way where this is what you want to be doing. Because if it is, I love this with Liliana. The 2-for-1, 2-for-1, the fact that Liliana can take down the small and Noxious Gearhulk take out the big, that Liliana has a great target to get back, that The extra life can be much appreciated for all the other black ways to pay life. The fact that Noxious Gearhulk, the fact that it has menace is kind of cute for being able to make it harder on people to stop you from going after planeswalkers. And if you end up playing Goblin Dark Dweller, it's kind of fun that there is a little bit of stacking. Right? Menace does stack in a way.
Yeah, that's cool. Nobody's easy to block.
I do think that Noxious Gearhulk is at the end of the day a 6-mana Necrotal. But if you compare this to Duplicant, it's a lot like Duplicant, that instead of exiling the creature, destroys it and then gains life equal to its toughness, which I think is a better deal on the average than just exiling it.
Gaining life equal to toughness is such an obviously desirable ability in the abstract, but like if you look at it in standard right now, like right this second, if you just transported this card into the current standard, which is dominated by Emrakul decks and Collected Company decks for the most part, this card seems a little slow against Company decks, and you don't care about gaining life against the other decks, right?
I mean, it's something. It always matters. But I think we're going to be in such a different world. There is no Collected Company.
No, obviously that's going to change.
I think it's really going to end up coming down to what the texture of the world looks like. But the option to be able to gain the extra life, I think, is on the average slightly better than the exile of a Duplicant. It's not like Duplicant's legal. But then instead of copying the creature, you end up with a 5/4 menace. Now, Duplicant could sometimes copy things that are much bigger, but contextually that was coming up in that format. I don't know that the Duplicant would really be that much better now. I do know that Noxious Gearhulk is reliably, good stuff, but questionable if you can afford to play stuff that slow. It's really going to end up just coming down to what other types of reactive cards do people have, because this is actually competing against things like Sorin Grim Nemesis.
Yeah, that's the problem, because I don't think it compares very favorably to Sorin.
That's the one that comes to mind to me, because I think even though, if what you want to do is kill a creature and gain its toughness in life, Noxious Gearhulk does it slightly better sometimes when you're losing, but not that much better. And when you're winning, Sorin is way better. And when you're on an empty board, Sorin is way better. And when you're against an opponent with removal, Sorin is way better. Now, you're not always going to be white is the big thing.
Well, there's some bonuses. Like when we were talking about Combustible Gearhulk, the fact that it's an artifact, there are some things that probably are playing in Noxious Gearhulk's favor. But I think
it's an artifact it's an artifact for your Delirium. It makes your Emrakul cheaper. It's a creature to get back with Liliana. These are all. It has purposes. I also the place I think that Noxious Gearhulk will be most commonly slotted is that I think that it makes there's a pretty compelling argument for it to be a one of in Traverse decks.
Oh, I love the ability to just search for a removal spell and or a life gain spell.
Exactly.
So let's bring it around. Last Gearhulk. This one seems really powerful to me. Torrential Gearhulk, 4UU for a 5/6, so it's bigger than Noxious Gearhulk for the same casting cost. And he's got Flash. When Torrential Gearhulk enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So it's like a Snapcaster Mage Gearhulk.
Yeah, I mean, this one is designed to be unbelievably appealing to the eye. It remains to be seen how many good instances that there will be for this to be triggering, because it's confusing. Because right now, so many of the best cards are not instants, and so I imagine that this card will end up proving fantastic. Because I think a 5/6 Flash is a 5/6 Flash for 6 is not that much short. A 5/6 Flash for 6 that draws a card is that's already getting into an appealing rate. But this doesn't just draw a card; it has selection and also is a Black Lotus. So it's a draw to, but with selection. So I think this is like a very, very attractive card. I think it's really just going to come down to what sort of instance can you actually play. The fact that it works with actually, to put it a different way, there's two different ways to play Torrential Gearhulk. Fair and unfair. If you're just playing it fair, like a Snapcaster Mage, it's cool that it's also a bit of a Necrotol on the way in. Because you can flash it down. Your opponent attacks with two creatures. You flash it down, play a removal spell for free, kill the one creature, and then block the other. That's awesome. But then it also can let you have a little bit of extra redundancy where you can like flash back your Fortune's Favor, or flash back your Counterspell, your Void Shatter, or whatever. It remains to be seen if there's enough of that stuff that you want to be doing. But this is definitely my favorite of the 4 Gearhulks up front. I don't think it's necessarily going to be the one that gets played the most. We'll see. I think the green one is quite good. I think the white one is quite good and has like particularly compelling reasons. I think the black one is okay, but it is nice. It has a niche at least. And I think the red one is probably the most dubious, but is quite fun and has purposes. And it has a more natural home with like ramp. The Torrential Gearhulk it might be one of the harder ones to make work, but I think this one has. I mean, this is so much what you want to do. I think you want this one to be good.
I think a fair version of the Torrential Gearhulk is probably insane. Like you already mentioned Void Shatter, right? If you were to Snapcaster Mage of Void Shatter, it's only one less mana than this, and this body is so much bigger, right?
Yeah,
and there are. I don't know if this is a real thing you would do. I don't know if you'd necessarily bring this card into bigger formats. But there are expensive instants that you could be casting. In some cases, that cost more than the Gearhulk. You get into your graveyard, and maybe things start becoming possible that we didn't know were possible before. And I'm not sure what those things are yet. But I do know that if I get the value of something that costs more than 6, and I only pay 6 for it, and I get a 5/6 out of it, probably doing it.
The unfair ways include using this guy as this card as a mana cheat, like you were describing. But there's also the recursive or semi-recursive nature. Now, this does exile the card, like Snapcaster Mage. But, like for instance, if you Torrential Gearhulk your Paradoxal Outcome, which is 3 and a blue, instant, return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents you control to their owner's hand, draw a card for each card returned to your hand this way. If you Paradoxal Outcome off of a Torrential Gearhulk, you can then bounce the Torrential Gearhulk plus some other stuff, like, say, Oath of Nissa, whatever stuff you want. And then you end up in your hand having a Torrential Gearhulk, Oath of Nissa, plus 2 more other cards. And you can, when you Torrential Gearhulk, you can flash back next turn. You can flash back another Paradoxal Outcome, or if there's any other copy effects. Those are the ones I'm going to be really looking for. Is if there's a way to copy a permanent at instant speed. For instance, there used to be the blue instant that would let you make a token copy at instant speed. I think it's just very interesting having a Snapcaster Mage with an enters the battlefield trigger. For instance, Eldrazi Displacer. Every time you blink Torrential Gearhulk with Eldrazi Displacer, you can just counter something for free with one of the counterspells. Now, each counterspell goes away, but you getting unlimited Snapcaster Mages without having to pay the cost is absurd.
While swinging for 5. Right? Because
it's not going to take long.
Yeah, you don't need to have an infinite number of counterspells because there's only 4 swings required to win the game. So 3 additional power if you're actually attacking with the Eldrazi Displacer.
Yep.
Right. Well, anyway, that was our quick review of the Gearhulks. Our special card this week was Combustible Gearhulk. I think he's awesome. I think it's a natural home in ramp. When I say awesome, I mean like sweet more than good, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was pretty good. Because I think he's so sweet. Right? Like, he's like a sugar factory. When he is on, he is on. Just a little question about consistency. We can find something to do, Congregated Dawn, like you said before, or some scrying with Little Miss Rye. I think that guy's gonna have some future in front of him. And again, I'd love to see that top 4 of a premier event with 4 different blue-red archetypes.
I wonder if one of these will finally be the artifact that makes Mishra's Workshop playable.
Probably not. Probably not. All right. Cool. We will be back on Thursday with a regular episode.
See you guys then. Thanks for joining us, and make sure to follow us at toplevelpodcast.com. Either on, you can follow us at Twitter or Facebook or Patreon or basically anywhere.
YouTube, Top Level Podcast, everywhere.
All that. All top level all the time. All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
See you Thursday. Bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge for jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core I trapped in amber stasis. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind.